Jennifer, we should play some world music next time in the waiting room. You know,
Great idea.
It's a good idea.
Because usually people sit next to each other and chat a little bit, but now there's this sort of silence. But we can play some world music or something.
Fabulous. I like it. I'm making a note.
Fela Kuti, I would say. That's great music. I'll type it to you. From West Africa.
Hello, Alfred. I'm pleased to see you virtually. I think we worked together with when we brought Mauricio Fontes here to campus. Yeah, very good.
I remember that, yes. He had a difficult time, to be honest.
Yeah, but he was pleased, and I think it worked out okay at the end.
Yeah, it worked out well, but it's the given on senses. Nice to see you, Alberto.
Yeah. Hey, Jennifer.
Hello. And
Good.
All right, I think we'll get started. I see people are still just coming in. Good afternoon and welcome. We're really delighted to have you join us for the first Global Conversations of 2021. The theme for this conversation today is Feeding the World. And we'll have the opportunity to hear from colleagues contributing to this goal from a diversity of perspectives and contexts. We'd like to take a moment to thank our co-sponsors for this series, UW's Institute for Regional and International Studies National Resource Center, Center for South Asia and African Studies Program, and to our speakers for sharing their work with us. Your host today is Dr. Sherry Tanumihardjo. Sherry is a professor in the Department of Nutritional Sciences. She studies vitamin A and carotenoid metabolism and serves as the director of the undergraduate certificate in global health. Her vitamin A assessment methodology is used around the world with special emphasis in African and Asian countries. She also serves on the World Health Organization's expert advisory panel. We'd appreciate it if you would mute your mics until after the presentations are finished. Please feel free to put questions in the chat at any time, including who they're for, if it's directed for a particular presenter or for the whole everybody. And we'll engage the questions after the presentations are over, which will really open up into the conversation part of today. Please note the session is being recorded. And without further ado, I would like to turn it over to your host, Sherry. Again, thank you for being here.
Happy 2021, everyone. I hope that you enjoy the next hour. We have 3 speakers. The first one will be Claudia Calderon, And our theme for the overarching for 3 of these presentations is feeding the world. And of course, this is one of the CALS strategic priorities. So Claudia is a faculty associate in the Department of Horticulture. She is a biologist with training in plant breeding and genetics. Her research focuses on the intersection of gender, agroecology, crop evolution, plant breeding, and sustainable food systems. She works using participatory approaches alongside smallholder farmers in rural areas of Central America. Hailing originally from Guatemala, Calderon obtained her bachelor's degree from the Universidad de San Carlos de Guatemala. Her MA from the University Stendal Grenoble, and her PhD from the UW in 2010 in plant breeding and genetics. Calderon is currently co-chair of the Horticulture Equity and Diversity Committee, faculty affiliate, and member of the Steering Committee for Latin American, Caribbean, and Iberian Studies, the CALS Global Committee, and the Horticulture Academic Staff Committee. She has worked in several Latin American countries, including Guatemala, Costa Rica, and Honduras. So I would like to now hand it over to Claudia for 7 minutes.
So let me share my slides. And if someone just can give me a yes, that you can see them. All right, I'll move forward. Yep, perfect. So thank you so much for the introduction. Hello and good evening to some of the participants perhaps. And thank you so much for the CALS Global for inviting us to engage in these global conversations. I hope one of the outcomes is to consolidate some of collaborations among ourselves and people beyond UW. So I'm going to bring this slide back at the end to share some of my collaborators, but I wanted to jumpstart with the discussion on what the title of this panel is. And I think it is important to have a reflection on what we mean and the different meanings that we can have with feeding the world. So in certain contexts, a phrase like this can carry a rhetorical baggage that can be intentional or not, but that can translate a power differential between a group that can decide or prioritize what type of agriculture is going to be put forward and what food people are going to be eating in the world. And in a context where we want to consider equity, diversity, and inclusion, it's particularly important to understand how can some of the underlying interpretations of these phrases like this carry, so we don't risk considering alternative approaches from local or regional partners. As was mentioned, I am from Guatemala, and for the past 6 years, I've been collaborating with indigenous communities in the western highlands of Guatemala. Oops, I was pointing, but I realized that spotlight. Okay, so Guatemala is a small country in Central America. If you just drive or fly down from Wisconsin, you can arrive eventually to Guatemala. And like many other places in the world, smallholder farmers, sorry, this is not allowing me to move. There. Oops. Okay, so that little, if someone can, or maybe I'm the only one who can erase that, but in a lot of smallholder farmers are facing challenges in their production systems. And in particularly the farmers I work with in Guatemala are facing challenges that are related to the topographical localization of where they live. They are in the highlands, as I mentioned, so they are like 10,000 feet above sea level. That would be like around 3,000 meters above sea level. They have very steep terrains, as you can see in the picture on the right-hand side above. and water scarcity, lack of infrastructure, roads, communication, electricity, irrigation systems. So back in 2015, we collaborated with colleagues of Universidad de San Carlos, interdisciplinary group, political scientists, agronomists, agroecologists, nutritionists, to try to understand what are what are these challenges that smallholder farmers are facing, but how are they doing in terms of food sustainability and climatic resilience. And we also collaborated with Red Cuchubal, which is an association of smallholder farmers that provided the input and the connection with the farmer networks that we work there. This was a work that was funded by an Irish NGO called Trocare, and they shared these important outcomes of this collaboration, very scientific-based integration of their indigenous or traditional knowledge with more contemporary knowledge is really substantiated by scientific knowledge. So they're diversifying their fields, they are incorporating different crops temporarily and spatially, heterogeneity. They're emphasizing the use of native seeds, crop rotation, but also incorporating these perennial crops. In this case, we can see a lot of fruit trees that are incorporated in their systems, and reliance in local technologies, local sourcing of what they're using, their inputs for their agriculture. Another important aspect that we noticed was that they maintained that coupling with the animal husbandry. So they are growing in these terraces some grasses that they use to feed their animals, and the animal manure is returned back to the fields. So having that emphasis on nutrient cycling is really important for them. And from that research, I have been collaborating with them using participatory approaches and trying to gather what are the main challenges that they face in terms of food production and areas where I can collaborate. So one of the areas that they share at some point was like in maize post-harvest. And I was able to submit a USDA proposal that got funded to assess the mycotoxins presence in the grain that has an important interdisciplinary work that can combine human health, animal health, plant health as well. I won't dive that. I'll talk a lot about the interdisciplinary a little bit further down the road. And like a third wave of interaction with these communities, once that we have established this trust and collaboration with them, is the importance on bringing students from the university to be allow them to do research in these areas, to collaborate and learn with these farmers, but also to bring some of their results back to help the communities. So I have the pleasure to be working with Marisa Lanker, a PhD student in the Nelson Institute, and Annika Rice, a master's student in the geography department. One of the questions that we were asked for this panel is, what have we learned from interdisciplinary efforts? And particularly, it's important, like a take home or an assignment I would give the participants to consider what some of these terms are used sometimes interchangeably, but they are not. But basically, for my research, interdisciplinarity has permeated my work since I was an undergraduate student. So I had been working with ecosystems approach, eco-health approach, working with Chagas disease back in Guatemala. And then I have had the pleasure to collaborate with great researchers and scientists here at the University of Wisconsin, from the Global Health Institute, the School of Medicine and School of Veterinary Medicine, and the 4W, to understand and build an integrative framework in transversal issues that incorporate One Health, and One Health is already a framework that is interdisciplinary by nature, but overlaying on top of that, like a gender analysis and highlighting a little more the role of agriculture that sometimes get a little bit to a second level or not even discussed in the One Health approach. And another of the papers and collaborations that I have here at UW has been with a group of interdisciplinary women from the experts in law, in gender, indigenous knowledge, biology, agriculture, climate, where we have analyzed sustainability models utilizing a three-dimensional approach that incorporates human rights, gender, and indigenous knowledge. I can share those links to the papers if needed. The other question that we were asked is, how does this work advance equity and diversity? So we mentioned that incorporation of the indigenous knowledge, but also the gender lens that allows us to understand. So I put the word in the bottom of the slide, cosmovisión, but these worldviews that are so important and ingrained in these communities. And if we are able to understand how they view the land, how they connect with the land, with their communities, with the family, we are able to have more culturally sensitive collaboration in our role as scientists and academics when we are collaborating with communities around the world. And particularly, I just wanted to highlight again this gender aspect that is very relevant for the work I do. Remembering that women are 43% of the farmers in the world, but they are producing food in a completely different scenario than men. They usually don't have land tenure. They have high illiteracy levels. They don't have access to microcredit or as easily as men, don't have access to a lot of other resources. So if we are able to emphasize and invest in our scholarly work in women, we are certain that we can make changes in the productivity levels and also reduce food insecurity. So I have one last slide, but I'm sure I'm a little bit over time. So I just want to highlight the bolded terms, like what are the lessons learned, including gender lens approach, very important, but also considering the sustainability of agriculture. Who are going to be doing agriculture? We need youth interest. And climate change and crisis have put in a lot of pressure in mobilization, whether it's migration to urban sites or migration, like the big caravans that we saw, and there's another one coming to the US. It's important to consider how the policies and climate change are influences that. But also like take notes of resilience examples that are coming. And I know that from the COVID-19 pandemic, there's a lot of examples that we can gather around the world that can be shared among our partners. So hopefully we can find next collaborators, but without further ado, I want to let our excellent next partners, Shawn, to share his interesting work with the rest of us. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Claudia. So yes, we're going to move on to Shawn. And Shawn Steffan is an associate professor in the Department of Entomology and a research entomologist with USDA ARS. He specializes in organic production methods from seed to harvest to sale and has worked closely with national leaders in the local organic foods movement. His current research focuses on the importance of symbiotic microbes for larval bee development. He is also currently working with organic cranberry growers in Wisconsin and Quebec, Canada, focused on the novel bioinsecticide that uses native nematodes as highly virulent biocontrol agents. He works on food web ecology, which is his topic today. In Japan, he collaborates with scientists in Argentina on high elevation food webs of South America. He also has current and past collaborations in Germany, Denmark, the United Kingdom, Chile, Mexico, and Korea. So Shawn, please take the floor.
Great, thank you so much. Let me get the share screen up and running here. All right, all good? Okay, hey, many thanks. All right, so typically I introduce my work as having one foot in agriculture and the other in food web ecology. Today, however, I'll be framing my work in terms of its role bringing together researchers, ideas, and expertise from around the world. Let me just say that all this matters. The diversity of inputs and approaches truly matter when it comes to problem solving and innovation. As the sole federal cranberry entomologist in the US, I focus on novel ways of protecting the cranberry harvest. I also study the basic underpinnings of agriculture, namely food web ecology. So what is a food web and why are they so important? A food web is a conceptualized framework of the flow of matter and energy through organisms. Food webs are essentially circuitous ebbs and flows of organisms interacting. And they are the communities and meta-communities of animals, microbes, and plants that largely comprise our biosphere. They do everything. Agriculture itself is a food web, and it's part of a broader overarching food web. Globally, these food webs unite people in the sense that they feed us, clothe us, clean up our wastes, and provide the raw materials for almost anything we create. In essence, food webs are a vast global equalizer, given that all humans share basic needs that are sustained by these webs. I work with folks across continents, from Asia to Europe to South America to North America. My work has often asked the question, who is eating whom and why does it matter? For the last 11 years, I've collaborated with colleagues and a true friend in Japan, Dr. Yoshito Chikaraishi. He's an extraordinarily skilled isotope ecologist, which means he analyzes the particular blend of stable isotopes within biomass. All elements exist as isotopes. Some are stable and some are not. The stable isotopes of certain elements behave very predictably in a food chain, and we're able to use this to estimate an organism's position in that food chain. This work has been used to illuminate the trophic identities of organisms, also known as their place in the food chain. This work has been very gratifying. I've hosted Yoshito here in Madison 3 times in the last 10 years. Here he is with his PhD student, Yuko Takuzawa, on a tour of the UW Arboretum. Isn't it strange, though, to see people standing so close together without masks? It's still jarring to me. But in this case, our collaboration has provided avenues of communication, sharing of culture in terms of food, literature, and the sense of community, this sense that despite being on opposite ends of the globe, we still strive for and hope for many of the same things, making discoveries, contributing to the welfare of our countries and of the world, and to build lives that are meaningful. In the process, we train the next generation of students to appreciate other cultures, to think globally, and be ready to respect and plug in to other cultures and other societies. All right, and in that spirit of cooperation, I'm focusing here on leafcutter ants. As a society, they have distinct roles and functions. There are soldiers, nurses, foragers, and reproductives. They work together gathering leaves to feed a massive sponge-like fungus, and then this fungus grows and feeds the ant little fruit. Most folks know about the leafcutter ant system. They're among the most well-studied insects in the world. Here in this picture, you can see them setting leaf fragments atop their fungus garden. In turn, these ants grow a bacterium on their bodies. Note this white powdery substance on the outside of the ant. And these bacteria defend the entire fungus garden from invading fungi. These communities are dominant forces in the neotropics. So my work with Yoshito and Yuko has shown that this community has 4 distinct levels, 4 distinct trophic levels. At the base is the plant matter, and it is consumed by a fungus, which is consumed by ants, and at the top is the bacterium feeding on the ants and protecting the entire symbiosis. So one of the things that has become apparent from this work is that whether the consumer is big or small, or even alive or dead, its trophic identity is dictated by what it has eaten. This was discovered in collaboration with my postdoc and now assistant scientist, Dr. Doddenpaul. She and I have demonstrated the concept of trophic equivalence, which posits that the microbiome is trophically indistinguishable from the macrobiome, lending credence to this idea that in the food web, you truly are what you eat, regardless of whether you're a mushroom, a wolf, a beaver, or fill in the blank. My team has taken this idea to the high Andean plateaus of South America. In collaboration with Gonzalo Barcelo and John Pauly, we've examined the trophic identities of pumas and condors, showing that microbes in this food web are analogous to little pumas within the cadavers of vicuñas, which are a smallish llama-like herbivore. These kinds of projects bring students from far-flung countries such as Argentina and allow young students to team up with professors asking questions that we all care about. With compelling discoveries in hand and a toolbox of high-impact analytical tools, these students head out into the world of science and industry, applying their skill sets to local, regional, and global problems. This is one way in which the Wisconsin idea extends far beyond our state borders. All right. So the concept of trophic equivalence has helped us to understand the importance of microbes for bee nutrition and protection. Here, we've shown that bee bread is analogous to fungi feeding on bread, or a deer feeding within a meadow. In all these cases, an herbivorous consumer is embedded within their food. As a blended complex, the plant and microbial consumers are like bacon bits in a salad or meatballs in spaghetti. And it's actually much more nutritious for the consumer of that complex. In terms of bees, pollination, and agriculture, we've shown that these embedded microbes, they are like microbial meat for developing bees. And we've shown that bees, and it appears that virtually all bees are omnivores. They eat significant amounts of microbial meat. And they actually require these external microbial digesters. Here are international collaborations between Japanese, American, Indian, and Korean scientists have allowed us to show that bees are omnivores because they eat so much non-plant protein, basically microbial meat. When agricultural fungicides kill off the microbes, the bee larvae starve. This discovery is changing the way that agrochemicals are used, and is guiding new strategies that are being designed to conserve bees by conserving their symbionts. Symbolically, these communities of educators and students that we nucleate across cultures and regions are increasingly benefiting from these kinds of symbioses. Because of this, we're able to ask and answer bigger, more important questions. I think I've gone a little over on time, and I'll leave it at that. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Shawn. Actually, your time was perfect.
Great.
All right, so we are going to move on to our final speaker of today. And his name is Michel Wattiaux. He was actually raised on a dairy farm in Belgium, and he completed a PhD in ruminant nutrition at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. After 10 years of international dairy extension efforts, Michel became a professor in the dairy science department at University of Wisconsin-Madison, and this happened in 2000. Of course, we all know now that that is animal and dairy science. Michel's disciplinary research has focused primarily on dietary manipulation altering carbon, specifically methane, and nitrogen, specifically urinary urea, loss from dairy cattle. Michel also has collaborated extensively with multidisciplinary teams to evaluate the environmental impact of contrasting dairy systems in the United States and in other countries, primarily in Latin America, but also Europe and Africa. Michel has earned many teaching awards and has gained an international reputation for his innovative work in the scholarship of teaching and learning. Currently, Michel supervises 4 graduate students and is teaching multiple courses with a strong emphasis on sustainability of dairy systems in the United States and around the world. So please take off, Michel.
Thank you, Sherry, for that nice introduction. I hope everybody can see the screen at this point, so I'll get going. Put my timer on. So,
You need to share your slides.
oh, am I not?
Not yet.
Not yet. Oh, I need to sorry about this. Let me go back to sharing this desktop. How about that?
Wonderful.
All right. Thank you, everyone. So yes, my conversation on feeding the world today will just zero in dairying in Mexico. Some of you in the audience know that I've been working on this topic for quite a number of years, if not decades. And I'm going to try to focus on smallholder, family farm, factory farm in the context of Mexico. Oops, yes, there is that idea of how to move the slides. This happened before. Let me see. Moving the slides forward here. Sorry about this. Oh, here we go. So here's a map of Mexico, and the two places that I've been involved in Mexico include the state of Jalisco, and I'm sorry, I'm having a problem here with my okay, sorry about this. Oh, here we go. I don't know why it takes so long. So here's the state of Jalisco in central Mexico, you know, with highlands all the way down to tropical region and the coast. University of Guadalajara is the main partner in that state. And the state of Estado de Mexico, which is a very populated state that basically surround, you know, the 20 million people living in Mexico City. So two very different contexts for dairy development, if you will. So a little bit of a brief history of my collaboration with Mexican partners. And the first one is with Dr. Carlos Arriaga from the Estado de Mexico, La Universidad Autónoma del Estado de Mexico in Toluca. And it's a long story, but my point here about the collaboration is that, you know, there's a lot of serendipity happening, but it's always long-term relationship that seems to matters and maintain those collaboration alive over decades. I met Carlos in Thailand, actually. But before that, I met him by searching him on the internet because of the work that he was doing in Mexico. And I felt we had a common ground here. And if I can put a quote in his words, you know, if he were with us, he probably would say something like, you know, in certain rural communities, smallholders, dairy may be an economic engine leading to poverty alleviation and much more in terms of, you know, economic, social benefits to poor rural communities. The other partners that I worked with over also almost 2 decades is Dr. Jesus Olmos from Jalisco, the University of Guadalajara, in the satellite campus of Los Altos near Tepatitlan. Where did we meet? Well, actually, we met in room 209 of Animal Science Building because Jesus was a student with us back in the early 2000s, got a PhD here, and then went back to his campus. And I remember him very well when he came to say goodbye. He was on his way back to Mexico after he completed his PhD, and me telling him, well, maybe not that fast, you know, I may come back and ask you for a few favors down the road. And he's been very instrumental in helping move the collaboration. So for his words in his mouth, that would probably be increasing milk per cow is vital to the economic future of family farms in Los Altos de Jalisco. So 2 different universities, 2 different contexts. The work that I've done over the last 2 decades, I think links very clearly to some of the CALS priorities climate change, health and wellness, economic community development, food systems. And we look at the interaction among those in a very different context. And here is just a few examples in the next few slides of work that we've done together and have been, peer reviewed. And I want to emphasize, who actually contributed to those efforts. And it was, again, those collaborators, myself, but also a student from Madison, or a student who eventually ended up in Madison. There is not a single path here. There's a lot of venue through which this collaboration can, foster and then lead to the publication. But in this case, we looked at evaluation of sustainability of smallholder systems and using a European tool that hardly anyone uses here in the US to assess sustainability of food systems. So it was a very interesting topic to look at. Here's another paper with collaborators in Toluca, where we look at farmer characteristics and technology adoption among the smallholders. And this is a topic that is cross-cutting, right? It applies, to us here in the US, to Europe, to any community around the world where technology may or may not be adapted, and understanding why would be critical. Here's a third example of, again, a very different story behind it, but it's a work that has been published looking at alternative forage, basically. And in this case, we were looking at triticale hay to replace alfalfa in a dairy cow diet. And this experiment has actually been conducted on a commercial dairy farm in Mexico with a Mexican scientist from INIFAP who came to Madison to complete his PhD with a scholarship from the equivalent of the NSF in Mexico, basically. I want to finish my presentation to say this is not all about research. And actually, it's probably not as much about research as it is about people and about students and about colleagues. And this is a poster that I presented a couple of years ago at the CALS symposium, trying to link what we do with Sustainable Development Goal of the United Nations. And so over the last 5-6 years, I developed courses along those lines. And I just want to take a minute here to discuss how the collaboration with my colleague in Mexico have been sustained over the years, thanks to the field study abroad that I organized annually until COVID, came and hit us here. And I think one of the premise for all of the work that we do is a shared cross-cultural experiences and understanding of the issue that we're dealing with. And then we can move from there to trying to understand very deeply some of the great issues that we're dealing with, whether it's in Mexico or here at home. So what's the contribution of livestock to sustainable development, not only in Mexico, but right here at home? What are the local food systems, not only in Mexico, but how about here at home? Marginalization of culturally rich communities, not only in Mexico, but here at home. So I think, going to Mexico and working with Mexico is as much about us than it is about them, if we can put it that way. And I will stop here and hoping to have a lot of questions to answer from you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michel, for keeping to time. So this starts our question and answer period. So I would first like to ask Claudia. Claudia, you talked about nutrient cycling using sort of manure from cattle and putting it back. Do many farmers in Guatemala use fertilizers?
So it's a tricky question because in the region where I am, there are the way that the extension packages have been distributed or promoted have been that reliance on input, meaning also the access to purchasing seeds and getting fertilizers. But the smallholder farmers and those who don't have the means to purchase or they are, and particularly the agroecological farmers with whom I've worked, they are steering away from external inputs. So they are utilizing foliar fertilizers. They prepare their own fertilizers, and they have that connection with the manure, except if they don't have a lot of space and they don't have animals, then they are preparing those fermented foliar or additional compost that can be added there to their crops. So that is in that particular region. So I'm talking in that particular context, but obviously there's different type of agriculture, there's different type of farmers. And I would say that the hegemonic way of doing agriculture would be with fertilizers.
Okay, thank you. We have a couple of questions for Steffan, Dr. Steffan. And first, I would like to thank you. I didn't know that bees were omnivores. So thank you for teaching me that bit of trivia. But there's a question that's from Michael Goodman, and he says, will the decrease in bee populations threaten the food web cycles?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we are seeing significant declines in bee biodiversity around the world. Some bees, their abundances are increasing, but most are decreasing. So these food web patterns, there is a three-way mutualism, a three-way symbiosis between bees, the angiosperms, the plants they pollinate, and the microbes that are vital for the bees. So when one of those symbionts is in decline, then the whole symbiosis starts to crumble a bit. And so you can think of these as like modules of symbioses, and as a group, these symbioses achieve a level of stability. And so when you start taking out sort of like rivets out of that, the structure, you know, you take rivets out of a plane, the plane starts to lose parts and starts to lose altitude. And so that analogy is occurring. We are seeing the sort of crumbling of symbioses, the loss of certain bee types, certain plants that they pollinate. And so what the downstream impact of that will be is anyone's guess at this point, but biodiversity loss has been shown to decrease the goods and services that we humans get from those ecosystems. And so the more modules, the more parts you take out of that, the more you lose those services, and then you have downstream negative impacts that we are seeing in a variety. And like that's a 2 to 20-hour conversation right there, but fantastic question.
Okay, great. We're going to move on to Michel, and there was a question raised by Michael Goodman again, and Michel has answered it in the chat. And the question was, what impact has the decline of the ejido system had upon Mexico's food supply? So Michel, I would like you to first tell us what an ejido system is, and then answer the question to the group.
Sure. Well, thank you. And it's a very good question too. So ejido is a form of land tenure that goes back to pre-Hispanic. And so there's no individual properties of the land. It's collective land managed collectively. And so that land obviously had been taken away with the Hispanic conquest. And throughout the good part of the 20th century, there's been a lot of effort by the Mexican government to return the land to the smallholders. It's a very complicated history because you know there are success stories with ejido consolidating their resources to be successful in the current economic condition of Mexico. But it's not always been the case. But my response in the chat was that in general, ejido continues to play a very critical role in the social and economic fabrics of rural Mexico.
Okay, wonderful. So Alfred, in the chat, you said you have a generic question for all three of our speakers.
Yes.
Yes, please.
I mean, I can ask that if there's time, but my generic question is, so there's universality in science and agricultural science that we can use to study, let's say, small communities, and some of the examples were given here. But my question is there something in these small communities in terms of science that we can then bring to universality?
Okay, do any of you want to address that question?
Can I just ask, Alfred,
Yeah.
could you repeat the last part of that question? I didn't catch it.
But yeah, thank you. So I think with this, we can bring scientific principles and understanding by studying small communities and how they survive and increase and work on their food productions. But is there something universal in small communities that we can lift up to higher levels and understand some scientific principles?
Maybe I'll jump in to get started with this. And my gut reaction, Alfred, is the principles that we could learn from studying those communities are related to the multifunctionality of agricultural systems and social, economic, environmental relationship, maybe less environmental, more social and economic. How do people organize themselves around the production and distribution of food? We in the land grant systems that we are benefiting from 150 years of very advanced but also very reductionist research. I think that we start to turn around and say, well, the system is not perfect. There are ways to make it better, and one of the ways is to really look at the system, and however you decide that design that system. And I think those communities are providing some element of universality on what makes a local food system, resilient, sustainable, equitable, and I think this is where we can learn a lot from them.
Also, to tag along from what Michel mentioned, I would say that, or from my experience working with agroecology, like the more we see and we understand and work with different communities doing agroecology, the more we can see that it's not like a universal recipe, but there are things that are unique and that are regional or local that are also very important. But there are, what Michel mentioned, I think that there are some communities, particularly indigenous, that have a tight relation to the land. And in that relation, they have incorporated in the small farms they have that are smaller than 2 acres, they have a diversified production if they're able to have that and if they're using those traditional knowledges. And that multifunctionality that Michel mentioned, I think, is what provides means for resilience and one of the things that can be incorporated. And yourself as a soil scientist, you understand more, like a lot of the plant scientists, we're seeing what it's above the ground. But when these people are incorporating rotation, polyculture, intercropping over time, they are providing a lot of diversity above and below the ground. And that conception of diversity and respect to the land, I think, brings some understanding of like a bigger understanding of how they relate to their land and how they are moving towards sustainable practices that are harder sometimes to understand when we are disconnected from the very same crops that feed ourselves.
Okay, we have a number of questions coming in. So Thierno has a question. How receptive are small communities to foreign input, and how much impact is it having on their day-to-day lives? So maybe Michel, did you want to answer that question?
Yeah, very quickly, but I want to leave the room for the others too. I'm not quite sure where Cherno is coming with that question, but it makes me think obviously of the Green Revolution, right? We can, we can assume that everyone is familiar with it. And indeed, with the Green Revolution came the necessity to use external input to obtain the maximum benefits from high genetic potential germplasm, plants or animals for that matter. Oftentimes those inputs in a way are destabilizing the system, as I've experienced in my career working in different parts of the world. And so I think there is naturally division about some people being convinced that how do you create how do you operationalize sustainable intensification, but with those inputs on the one hand, but on the other hand is how do you incorporate them in the systems without breaking the system apart? That's the challenges I see with those.
Okay. We have a couple of questions that came in for Shawn. So is the microbiome that the bees feed off similar or different in different countries and continents? And what is the basis for the various international collaborations?
Fantastic. Great question. So first of all, like the microbiome associated with bees, there is, it's broken up into two groups. There are endosymbionts, which are the gut symbionts, and there are also the exosymbionts. They exist outside of the bee. So those are two distinct communities within a single bee species. We've also seen that there are, for some bee species, regional consistencies in that gut microbiome, as well as their external exosymbionts. And so that's some indication of how critical these microbes are for that particular bee type. There's an example, there's a great, there are these stingless bees in Brazil that cultivate fungi within the wax of their cells, not their bodily cells, but like their brood cell chamber. And they graze on those fungi. So region by region, there are likely to be differences and consistencies in those particular microbial species, but functionally, it's very consistent what's being done. The functions are break down the pollen grains, extract those nutritious cytoplasm elements, and then consolidate it within microbial biomass, and then that becomes the meat for the developing bee larva. Functionally, that's what's happening wherever we look. Even though the species, plug in, plug out, they may be different, but the functions are broadly consistent. That's a great question. I see one here, Alfred had asked, like, when will our diets include insects? Yes, the bread the toast you had for breakfast this morning had beetle bits in it. There's allowable levels everywhere. It's unavoidable. And then we also, when you eat lobster or crab, those are basically bugs of the sea. They're arthropods. They're bigger. We pull out the parts that we like. But increasingly, and I think this is what your question's getting at, in the US, are we incorporating insects increasingly into our diet? That answer is yes. Much of it is about working out the processing so that you don't have like crunchy legs sticking out of the muffin and that kind of a thing. And it's easily done, and it's being done to various degrees and places.
Okay, there's another question on why are there so many few cranberry experts, given the importance of the economy, especially to Wisconsin, but other states also?
Well, so cranberry is a very specialized crop. It's special in one regard because it's a native plant in North America, and it's one of the few native plants grown commercially. It's a minor crop, and even among minor crops, it's kind of minor. Wisconsin is, far and away the leader. We grow more cranberries than all other states combined, including, Canadian production. And it's just that, like, despite that, it just doesn't have the, I would say, like, the marketplace presence of other fruits. And that's just like a fact of the marketplace. So the number of people working on it are a function of the funding to provide those people. And there are about a dozen of us in the US, Massachusetts, New Jersey, obviously Wisconsin, Michigan, Washington State, and Oregon, where much of the work in the US is done. Yeah, sorry.
Okay, thanks, Shawn. So we have a new question or questions that just came in from Kim Kruger. And what can large-scale agricultural production here in the United States learn or adopt from smaller scale and indigenous agricultural practice, both in the US and abroad, specifically to improve human and environmental health? So pretty much the Sustainable Development Goals all in one question. So Michel or Claudia?
Claudia, why don't you go for it?
Okay.
Thank you. So that's a great question. I think that, again, like emphasizing that we cannot have prescriptive recipes that can be generalized, but that we should look at the location and to see what fits in that particular area. But there are definitely things that how agriculture used to be that then in the maybe for efficiency got changed, and that has created a little bit of challenges, I would say, in terms of sustainability. So one of those is what I mentioned about the animal husbandry. We have separated in the Midwest. If you are driving in the summer, you're going to see the dairy farms are in one side, and you have the farmers who are growing soy or maize or alfalfa. But in the past, you used to have them together. So that decoupling, I think, coupling back together could enhance that nutrient cycling that can reduce the need to purchase fertilizer, because you would have that coming from your animals. And it definitely requires management, but there are things that can be incorporated. And the other is also looking back at history. We can learn a lot. Farms used to have in the US much more diversity than they have right now. We have reduced to a few commodity crops. And when we look at smallholder farmers, where they're basically focusing on vegetables, and there are farms that have 42 different products in their farm. That's like a super high number if you compare to a farm that is producing 3 crops here in the US. So the increasing biodiversity and animal husbandry could be like two elements that I would mention.
And quickly, to complement, and I fully agree with what Claudia mentioned. But the way I would share my thought is, it should be actually a two-way street. Smallholders could learn from large producers could learn from smallholders. One is very specialized, the other one is very diversified. And one of the things that I like to tell my students is that one of the problems that we have in the US is that we always believe that more is better. If something is good, then we're going to do more of it, and there is never an end to it. And I think, in the context of food production systems, and again, when we talk about multifunctionality, we don't want to maximize anything. We want to optimize. And I think obviously the smallholder systems are have been optimized because of generations and generations and generations of making that system work. This is why they are so resilient. They've crossed centuries and they are still here with us today. In comparison to large dairy farms or large, beef cattle that we have in the U.S., that are so fragile, in so many different ways, but yet are so efficient at producing all of us who live in cities and wants to get convenience of going to the grocery store to get what we like to eat.
Okay, thank you. Well, we are almost at time. I would like to pass it over to Jennifer so that she can tell us about the next global conversations that we will be having throughout the semester. Thank you all for here, but please listen to the next topics.
So thank you. This has been absolutely fabulous. In the spirit of what was intended with these conversations, it was really to start building, strengthening our global community through conversation. So I'm just delighted. There are a lot of these conversations I'd love to have continue. And with that in mind, a couple of things that we wanted to share. First of all, the contact information for our guests today. Please feel free to reach out to them. We will be sharing their presentations on our website shortly. They will be up and we'll get that link out to you, as well as an opportunity to provide feedback. Since this was our first one, we're very interested in any recommendations you would have for the rest of them coming forward. And also just wanted to share, again, this is on our website, but a preview of some of the ones coming up. There'll probably be some additional pieces added, but you can get a sense of what the themes are. And again, just really appreciated everybody joining us today. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you to Sherry for being our host, and to our co-sponsors. And we'll look forward to the next conversation, if you will. Please continue it in the meantime.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thanks for organizing.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody. Happy weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.